In the summer of 1996, the NBA was at a crossroads. A fresh wave of talent was about to reshape the league, and at the center of it all stood a 6-foot guard from Georgetown named Allen Iverson. The Philadelphia 76ers held the #1 pick and selected him, instantly pairing his fierce style with a city that mirrored his grit. But history could have been different. Imagine, instead, that the Toronto Raptors, a fledgling franchise in just its second year of existence, had taken the leap and drafted Iverson. The ripple effects of that single choice could have reshaped not only Iverson's career, but the identity of basketball in Canada, the rise of Vince Carter, and even the balance of power in the Eastern Conference for years to come. At that time, the Raptors were searching for relevance. They were a young team, struggling for identity, playing in a market many doubted could sustain professional basketball. Their roster lacked star power, their fan base was uncertain, and they desperately needed a face of the franchise. Iverson, with his magnetic personality and fearless game, could have been the answer to those prayers. Instead of being the icon of Philadelphia, he could have become the heartbeat of Toronto. Picture the scene. Opening night, 1996. The Air Canada Centre doesn't even exist yet. The Raptors are still playing in the cavernous Sky Dome. But as the lights dim, the crowd roars with anticipation. Out steps Allen Iverson in the bold purple Raptors uniform, ready to unleash a new brand of basketball on a city just learning to love the game. From the moment he takes the court, the energy shifts. Toronto no longer feels like an expansion afterthought. It feels like the home of the most electrifying guard in the NBA. The early years would have been fascinating. In Philadelphia, Iverson's raw talent clashed with team management, coaches, and an organization unsure how to handle his uncompromising individuality. In Toronto, the situation might have been different. A team with no history, no baggage, and no established culture could have been the perfect blank canvas for Iverson. Instead of being forced into someone else's mold, he could have defined the Raptors' identity from the very start: fast, fearless, unapologetic. By his second season, the ripple effects grow even larger. In reality, Toronto's big move came in 1998 when they traded for Vince Carter. In this alternate history, that still happens. Only now, Carter isn't arriving to carry the weight alone. He's joining forces with Allen Iverson. Imagine the possibilities. Two of the most explosive scorers of their generation, one in the backcourt, one on the wing, both capable of jaw-dropping highlights on any given night. The Raptors don't just become exciting, they become must-see basketball. Every night, Toronto would have been a show, blending Iverson's relentless drives and ankle-breaking crossovers with Carter's gravity-defying dunks. The league's narrative begins to shift. Instead of Iverson carrying the Sixers on his back to a finals appearance in 2001, maybe it's Toronto making that run. Carter and Iverson together in their primes would have been a nightmare matchup for opposing defenses. The early 2000s Eastern Conference was wide open behind the dominant Lakers dynasty. The Knicks, Pacers, and Heat had strong moments, but none had the consistent star power Toronto could have assembled. With Iverson and Carter together, the Raptors might have become the team to beat. Off the court, the impact could have been just as dramatic. In reality, Iverson's cultural influence was tied to Philadelphia. His braids, tattoos, and unapologetic swagger redefined what it meant to be an NBA superstar. Now imagine that influence exploding in Toronto, a city already defined by diversity, music, and cultural fusion. Iverson's presence could have accelerated basketball's rise in Canada by decades. Kids in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver wouldn't just be watching Vince Carter put on dunk contests. They'd also be emulating Iverson's fearless style, his attitude, his belief that a player his size could dominate among giants. The basketball boom that eventually produced stars like Andrew Wiggins, Jamal Murray, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander might have started even earlier. Of course, challenges would have remained. Iverson was never an easy fit. His relentless scoring often came with questions about efficiency, his uncompromising personality often clashed with authority, and his body, taking constant punishment, was always at risk. But in Toronto, the narrative might have softened. With Carter as a co-star, Iverson wouldn't need to shoulder the entire scoring burden. With a young franchise willing to embrace him rather than fight him, Maybe the infamous practice saga never happens. Maybe Iverson finds a little more balance in his career. By the year 2000, Toronto could already be a playoff contender. In reality, the Raptors took small steps forward, but with Iverson and Carter together, the climb could have been faster. Playoff battles against the Knicks and Heat could have turned out differently. The epic 2001 second-round series, which in real life was Carter T's Raptors against Iverson G's Sixers, would instead have been Iverson and Carter together against the East. Who knows? Maybe they topple the Bucks. Maybe they make the finals. Maybe it's Iverson and Carter taking on Kobe and Shaq instead of Iverson alone. And what about legacy? Iverson's MVP season in 2001 is remembered as a crowning achievement, proof that someone his size could dominate the league. In Toronto, that MVP might still have come. Only now, it would have lifted an entire franchise with him. The Raptors wouldn't just be remembered for the Carter-era highlights. They'd be remembered as a dynasty in the making, led by two cultural icons in their prime. Part 1 of this story leaves us with a tantalizing thought. A young Iverson carving out a legacy not in Philadelphia, but in Toronto. A franchise with no history suddenly finds its identity, not just as Canada's team, but as one of the most electrifying teams the NBA had ever seen. And with Vince Carter about to enter the picture, the stage is set for the Raptors to go from expansion team to powerhouse almost overnight. By the summer of 2001, the Raptors were no longer just another expansion team fighting for recognition. With Allen Iverson at the controls and Vince Carter by his side, Toronto had become one of the most dangerous teams in basketball. Their games weren't just matchups, they were events. Crowds filled the Sky Dome and later the Air Canada Centre, not just to see basketball, but to witness a cultural shift. The energy in the building was unlike anything the league had seen in Canada before. And for the first time, the Raptors weren't simply happy to make the playoffs, they expected to win. That year's playoff run would have changed everything. In reality, the East was a battlefield where Iverson's Sixers clashed with Milwaukee and eventually lost to the Lakers in the finals. But with Carter and Iverson together, the Raptors could have rewritten that script. Imagine the Bucks trying to slow down not just Carter's high-flying attacks, but also Iverson's relentless drives. Imagine the Knicks struggling to contain two stars who thrived under pressure. The Raptors might have had enough firepower to punch through the East and face the Lakers for the title. Now picture it, the 2001 NBA Finals. On one side, Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. On the other, Allen Iverson and Vince Carter, the new face of Canadian basketball. Could they have toppled the mighty Lakers? Realistically, probably not. Shaq's dominance was nearly unstoppable, and even two scoring icons might not have been enough. But the point isn't a T whether they win the championship in that exact year. It's that Toronto would have arrived on the biggest stage much earlier. They would have announced themselves as a legitimate franchise, a destination, a team capable of competing with anyone. The years that followed could have been fascinating. In Philadelphia, Iverson's relationship with management and coaching staff became increasingly strained. In Toronto, his partnership with Carter might have balanced that tension. Carter's calm demeanor and Iverson's fiery edge would have complemented each other. The Raptors' front office, desperate for stability and success, might have built more aggressively around their two stars. Depth pieces, veteran defenders, shooters, the kind of support cast Iverson often lacked in Philadelphia, could have been assembled in Toronto to keep the window open. By 2003, when Carter was at his peak and Iverson was still an unstoppable scorer, Toronto could have been chasing championships year after year. The East at that time was vulnerable. The Pistons were rising but not yet dominant. The Pacers were solid but beatable. The Nets made finals appearances but lacked the raw firepower Toronto would have had. The Raptors could easily have been in that mix, rewriting playoff history and challenging the Lakers and Spurs dynasties more directly. Off the court, the ripple effect in Canada would have been seismic. Vince Carter's dunk contest win in 2000 made millions of kids pick up a basketball. But pairing that with Iverson's swagger, his authenticity, his impact on fashion and culture, the basketball explosion in Canada wouldn't just have been about highlights, it would have been about identity. The Raptors would have embodied a culture of toughness, creativity, and flair that resonated across the country. Young players who idolize Carter in reality might also have patterned themselves after Iverson, blending skill sets and confidence in ways that could have shaped an entirely new generation of Canadian basketball. The climax of this alternate story arrives in the mid-2000s. In reality, Carter was traded in 2004, Iverson's Sixers faded, and both stars spent years searching for new homes. But in this world, what if Toronto never lets go? What if Carter and Iverson stay together longer, building a foundation that lasts? The Raptors might have been perennial contenders, perhaps winning a championship before the 2010s. The thought of Carter and Iverson lifting a Larry O'Brien trophy in Toronto is tantalizing. A visual that would have rewritten the perception of Canadian basketball decades before Kawhi Leonard arrived. And yet, even in this dream scenario, challenges remain. Iverson's body endured constant punishment. His style of play was fearless but physically taxing. Injuries would likely have caught up with him regardless of city. Carter, too, faced criticism later in his career for effort and commitment. Keeping both stars aligned and healthy would have been the greatest challenge. Still, even if the partnership eventually broke apart, the legacy would already be cemented. Toronto would no longer be waiting decades for legitimacy. They would already have had their golden era. The resolution of this story is bigger than wins and losses. If Allen Iverson had been drafted by the Raptors, Toronto's identity as a basketball city would have been transformed overnight. Instead of being defined by a long climb to relevance, they might have become a league powerhouse in their very first decade. The what if isn't just about championships. It's about culture, about the way kids in Canada saw the game, about how the world viewed Toronto as a basketball destination. Imagine the Hall of Fame speeches, the documentaries, the legends told. Iverson, remembered not as the face of Philadelphia, but as the pioneer who made basketball explode in Canada. Carter, not as the lone superstar, but as half of one of the most dynamic duos the game had ever seen. The Raptors, not just champions in 2019, but contenders long before that. And so, the question lingers. What if that draft card in 1996 had read differently? What if Allen Iverson, the answer, had taken his talents not to Philadelphia, but to Toronto? The NBA we know today would look very different. And Canada, the country that fell in love with basketball through Vince Carter's dunks, might have found its identity even sooner, through the heart, grit, and brilliance of Allen Iverson.